Hello there, my name is Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as LevDev, and I'm here to be reflective. While the excitement of a new core set coming out and trying out with some new toys and such excite the player base, trying out the Elder Dragons, trying out some of the new creature archetypes or even tribal synergies, I feel it's best to realize that this is going to be the last set before rotation in October. With that, I figure it was best to actually go look at the sets that are going to be rotating out, aka the Kaladesh block and the Ravnica block, and look at some unpopular cards that now that since we're at the largest card pool that we ever been, I think it's deserved a second shot for either just potential side tech or maybe synergize with some of the new cards, or just do some silly shenanigans with brewing and such. Now, for this list, I'm going to use unpopular cards for those sets, or cards that don't see that much play. So no, this list is not going to contain any cards that's been on a Pro Tour, aka Shanra's Torch of Defiance, Glory Bringer, Walking Ballista, Winding Constrictor, the cards that you are probably going to wish that rotate out faster, or at least for people who play Magic at a more consistent pace, are probably going to be grateful once those cards rotate out. No. For now, we're just going to focus on cards that I think deserve to, at least either in Standard or in Brawl play, deserve at least a second shot to try out just for shenanigans. Anyway, let's start this list, shall we? Bada beep. But, first card on the list is actually a very unconventional card that didn't really see much play during the Amicat block, and that is Zero Deferment. It's a 2 mana and white creature human cleric that has flash, aka can be cast anytime as you would an instant, and it has an enter the battlefield trigger that essentially you can bounce any creature that either attacked or blocked this turn, and then you return back to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. Now, the reason why I think this card has actually deserved a second chance is, like I said, we're currently at the moment the biggest card pool currently in Standard before the rotation happens. And there is so many really good ETB triggers currently in Standard. I mean, the popular one is Champion of Wits, but I can name a bunch. There's some that create cat tokens, there's some that can help you draw cards, there's some that can help you mill an opponent, etc., etc., etc. So I feel that this card is deserved to at least have some shenanigans testing for that purpose, mostly that purpose alone. Just to try out some silly ETB into the battlefield trigger shenanigans, and just be able to bounce those creatures and repeat them. The main point, though, that I think that might actually make this card potentially competitive, though, it's his ridiculous synergy with the Ruiner, which is a new Elder Dragon and Nayako is coming out from the core set. Now, the dragon itself is a flying trampoline vigilance that has a weird semi-hexproof effect. The semi-hexproof effect goes away, though, when you deal damage. Or does it? One thing that people seem to forget, though, when you flicker cards from Magic that are creatures, the card that comes back in is not the old instant of the card. It's actually considered a new instant, aka why you still get the ETB effect triggers as I mentioned earlier. So, pretty much, since the new play, let's say you attacked with the Elder Dragon, it loses its hexproof since you dealt damage, someone tries to remove it, you flash this in, bounces that Elder Dragon, puts it back in, and hey, it's a new instant of the dragon, so it has hexproof. That can be very, very, very scary. So for those two facts alone, I think it's best to take a look at this card and try to give a shot at any brew that has white in it, that relies on ETB effects. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Next on the list is a very unconventional ramp card that actually happened during the Amican block that's in green. It's Harvest Season, 2 and a green for a sorcery spell. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, and X is the number of tapped creatures you control, and put those onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your library. Now, the first thing that comes into mind that people might think with this card is actually, Oh, you're probably saying this to recommend for Tachyover style decks, right? And while that is a little bit true, I also think this is a very synergistic card in this current meta with our current card pool. Now, the reason why this didn't see much play when Amonkhet came down was because there were semi-better ramp options currently in there. I mean, we had previous sets that, with the Emerge mechanic or a variety of other mechanics, that made getting bigger creatures out a lot more consistent. However, with the rise now of Llanowar Elves and very fast Mana Dork style decks, this card actually becomes significantly a lot better, since you're going to have some tapped creatures with those Mana Dorks. So, say, for example, you play with Llanowar Elves on turn 1, then on turn 2 you can actually cast this and just search for one land type of any basic type. That's actually not bad for a color searching spell, especially in multicolor decks. Are there better options? Yes, but I don't think this is a bad budget option. Also, the other reason why this is on the list is it has potential crazy synergy with Sylvan Awakening. Now, Sylvan Awakening is another 2 green cost sorcery spell that makes all your lands into indestructible creatures. Yeah, and when we cast that spell, we're having to tap some of those lands down, which will tap some of the creatures. Oh, and we're also going to have to cast Harvest Season, which will tap those lands down, which then will be creatures. Presuming we don't have any creatures on the board, that 6 tapped land creatures, casting Harvest Season, we can search up to on turn 6 basic lands, and ramp up to 12 mana on turn 7. That's busted, guys. That could be, if it weren't for the fact that the meta in itself is relatively fast, I think this is a combo that could be potentially pretty nuts. So, if you're up for them and wanting to try some silly shenanigan multicolor or multi-ramp deck, I'd say give Harvest Season a shot, especially with Sylvan Awakening, because that combo is just absurd. Next up on the list is actually a card that I think would actually be really fun to try as a Brawl Commander before the rotation happens. It's Unesh, forgive me my pronunciation, Cryosphinx Sovereign. It's 4 and 2 blue for a legendary creature Sphinx. Flying and Sphinx spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. And then whenever you cast this creature, or another Sphinx enters the battlefield under your control, you essentially reveal the top 4 cards of your library, and an opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put one pile into your hand, and the other into your graveyard. Very powerful spell. Many people might actually remember what this spell is. So, you cast that spell pretty much any time when a Sphinx enters the battlefield. Now, the reason why I recommend this now as a card to try out is I think it's going to be a really great Brawl Commander now. We are now, with the biggest card pool ever, have the most amount of Sphinxes currently in Standard. There's a couple of great ones that came out from Core 19. There was even a couple of good ones in the Amonkhet block itself. There's even just, from a variety of the sets that we just have a variety of decent Sphinxes. And there's some even good blue control spells and such. So, I feel this is a card that, this is my silly recommendation on this list, because I feel like in Brawl, someone just needs to make this happen. I really want to see someone do Sphinx Tribal. I mean, heck, even if you don't want to make this as your Brawl Commander and then go somewhere and try to broaden your colors with blue-white and just make it Sorius as your commander, seriously, someone needs to make Sphinx Tribal a thing. Really. Before it rotates out, and, well, I guess technically in Ravnica they do have Sphinxes, but you can't use this as your Brawl Commander since it's going to rotate out, so, yeah. Those people who like janky Brawl decks, get to it. Next up on the list is actually a personal favorite card of mine that I am still surprised doesn't see much play for how powerful it can be. And that is the Wildfire Eternal. A 3-mana red card that's a Zombie Jackal Cleric. Keep that creature type in mind for the record. It has Afflict 4, which means that if it ever becomes blocked, then the defending player has to lose 4 life. But our most thing that we're going to also pay attention to is the second text. That is, whenever the Eternal attacks and isn't blocked, you may cast an instant or sorcery card from your hand, without paying its mana cost. Guys, this card in the current standard can potentially be really, really busted. I mean, we have some very high-end now spells that we can cast. We have that Nexus of Fate. We have the Apex of Power. We even have the, if you need to, in a pinch, pretty much some really significant board wipes that you can cast for free when you attack with this and it doesn't get blocked. Now, some of you are going to argue, well, it's going to be blocked a lot, isn't it? Yes and no at the same time. Yes, it might be blocked, but there are options to actually make this unblockable. Some of them are instant spells, some of them are actually legendary creatures like Tetsuko, and some of them are even enchantments that came from the Amicant block itself, such as that cartouche of... It's not a... I think it's Ambition, I'm pretty sure it's the red cartouche. So, there are multiple ways to make this creature unblockable, which then allows us to cast that free instant or sorcery spell. And I don't think I need to repeat myself that we have some very powerful, not even high cost, just powerful in general instant sorcery cards that seen a ton of play in the meta. So, that in itself is amazing. But the fact that it's a zombie is something that I think we gotta keep in mind. I think there's going to be a potential Rakdos zombie deck as one of the potential archetypes they can actually toy with. And this card just goes into it without a sweat. There's one current sorcery spell that's coming from the core set that is Rise from the Grave, I think it was, if I remember correct, which allows you to, essentially, when you cast it for 5 mana, reanimate something from anybody's graveyard, aka return from the graveyard to the battlefield. Potentially casting that for free, thanks to this card, potentially, is absurd. So, honestly, I would say give this card a shot. If you have any Islet inclinations and want to cast a ton of free spells, or do some silly shenanigans, like I did with that Brew video with the Wildfire Eternal Storm deck, or you just want to do some reanimation type synergies, I think Wildfire Eternal is a card you really want to consider if you're splashing any red at all, in my personal opinion. The next card on the list is Claim to Fame, a black-red, so Rakdos sorcery spell that gives the ability for when you cast it for black for Claim to return a target creature card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then Fame, which is 1 in a red, to make target creature gets +2 and gains haste until end of turn. As I mentioned before, I think red-black zombies might be a thing. And I think people should, whoever go into red-black Reanimator, whether it's of the zombies, or hey, potentially dragons, hint hint, wink wink, nod nod, I think they might actually want to look at this card pretty significantly. In the current meta, we have a bunch of valuable 1-drop and 2-drops, and we're even getting some powerful 1 and 2-drops that are zombies, currently in the core set, specifically the Graveyard Marshal. Now, the problem is people are going to try to remove that pretty significantly. However, having a very cheap reanimation spell, aka Claim, is something that I think is going to be a lot more beneficial for that deck than, say, oh hey, let's play the new Liliana and then spend 3 of its loyalty points to recast our zombie for its converted mana cost. Okay, as much as I'm giving bad on the new Liliana, it's actually not a bad card for the deck either. It's not the greatest card, but that's a little side rant for another video. But really, this card is going to be beneficial in either zombie-based Rakdos decks like that, but it's also just a decent aggro card. Like, this one I'm kind of cheating on the list because there was some time where people were actually toying this card in red-black pirate aggro. It kind of loses its fame once people realize red-black aggro is just popular without having to be forced into the pirate archetype per se, but I'm still surprised that this card kind of got phased out of that deck. Overall, if you're the type of person that likes to go face or just wants to do some fun reanimation type spells, I think Claim to Fame is a card worth a shot. I mean, I'm not surprised if this is going to see some Pro Tour play, potentially now with the new set. I kid you not. But anyway, let us hope that you enjoy the claim for this card to fame. Bad pun aside. Next on the list, a card that many would find hard to negotiate on would be Shrewd Negotiation. It's 4 and a blue sorcery that has the ability to exchange control of target artifact you control and target artifact or creature you don't control. Now, there's people who are kind of tilting their head at this card because currently in the meta, thanks to the core set, we actually have the card Switcheroo, which is the same thing as this spell, except it only applies to creatures. However, I think I want to make an argument for this card. This card is actually really good in our current meta, where there's a lot of artifact generation. There are treasures, there are thopters and such. And I think we are also going to be in a meta where it's going to be very creature dependent. Like, there's going to be a ton of high value creatures and such. And I think this card is really good to help steal some of the late game bombs that I think some opponents are going to be trying to play. Plus, if you put this in a deck that either generates treasures or even just generate little thopters and such, which I think those decks are going to exist, I think this is a really good sideboard card against when you go against cards that are pretty much people are playing cards with high creature value, aka your giant 12/12s with trample, or the ones with hexproof, which in that case, I think you would want to go back to the core set and actually get that hexproof land so you can take the hexproof off, so this will work. Nevertheless, you can also take your people's glory arenas and such, and just simply exchanging a measly little artifact token for it. Yeah, I am still surprised this doesn't see as much play as with how much artifact generation of some cheap artifacts that we have currently in the meta. Seriously, if you're playing blue and you have any at all artifact generation, give this card a shot in the current meta. You're probably going to have some funny stories, in my personal opinion. Next on the list is going to be a card that's going to make people tilt their head sideways, and it is Dubious Challenge. Yes, guys, this is a card I think you need to try out in Standard. It's 3 and a green for a sorcery that says look at the top 10 cards of your library, exile up to 2 target creature cards from among them, then shuffle your library. Target opponent may choose one of the exiled creatures and put it on the battlefield under his or her control, and then put the rest onto the battlefield under your control. Now, there is so many reasons why this card is not totally great, but honestly, I think it's a card that's worth a shot. And the main reason is it's kind of like with cards like Vizier Deferment, and even cards that help flicker like Acrobatic Maneuver and such. Plus, we are in a meta where we can ramp to this by turn 3, or even turn 2 if we're really lucky with some certain variations. That I think this is a card that's worth a shot. It helps us get a creature out significant, and yeah, they're going to take the better of the 2 creatures, don't get me wrong, but I think we're in a meta where we have enough answers to the factor that if they decide to take the best creature, that we can answer it within the next turn without a sweat. Now, yeah, they do have a turn with the creature, yeah, keep that in mind, but as long as you make sure you don't get like something that you know would do lethal damage to you, I think this is a card that's worth a shot. It may not be the best card in the world, but honestly, I think this card might actually see some potential play that you might want to see. The fact that Elder Dragons are a fiend, boys, yeah, Dubious Challenge might be very dubious not to play. Next on the list is Fateful Showdown. 2 and 2 red for an instant spell that has Fateful Showdown deals damage to target creature or player, which I guess within the current new rule changes it would say any target, equal to the number of cards in your hand. Discard all the cards in your hand and then draw that many cards. Now, I'll be quite frankly honest, the only reason why I put this on the list is because since we have Reliquary Tower in the standard meta. The factor that now you can have an unlimited hand size, honestly, I want to see some Izzet deck try to make a really janky brew where you draw a ton of cards, and just essentially take all those cards and make it into a giant burn spell to hit your opponent with. Now, to be fair, I think this is actually more possible than first conceived, because we are now currently in a meta where there is a ton of draw spells. I mean, this draw spells in blue, this draw spells in red, this draw spells in pretty much any color under the sun. And I think it's one of those where I really want to see someone make this type of gimmick deck. I might even try it out. So, for those of you who want to try out something silly and try to make a deck that is very unconventional, I recommend giving this card a shot. And even if you don't go into the whole gimmick shenanigans of drawing a ton of cards and then trying to burn someone for, like, how many cards are in your hand, I still think in general this is just a decent burn spell. It cycles out your hand very relatively decent. The only reason I would not recommend this card is if you're playing an aggro deck. But if you're playing any realm of a mid-range deck or even a control-based deck that relies on an in-game combo, give this card a shot. The fact that you can cycle through your hand is nothing to sneeze about. So, that's why I think it would be a miss if we don't see someone playing with Fateful Showdown before rotation. Next card on the list might also make people kind of confused since it's Saram Sr.'s Edificer. 1 and a white, legendary creature dwarf advisor. Whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. Now, this is going to be my little exception to the rule of popular cards, since this does actually see some play currently in Standard, and there was even some decks that try to toy with this at some Pro Tours once in a while. However, the main reason I put this on the list is not the reason you'd think. I'm not saying we recommend putting this in a vehicle deck or such, or an equipment deck. Honestly, with Danitha making our auras cheaper from the Dominaria block, I really want to see this play in an aura control deck. I think that's a thing. I think you can actually potentially make that a thing. And just these two cards being this as a 2-drop, then a 3-drop, and then you can just cast auras for cheaper on turn 4 and such. I think that deck can actually potentially be a thing. Besides that, it's just a generally good also Brawl Commander as well that I don't really see people play that much. And I think it would be a perfect... The fact that we are now at the current standard card limit being the max as it is before rotation, I think you can cook up some pretty saucy mono-white deck which has all the aura, equipment, and vehicle spells, and just go nuts. Seriously guys, give this card a shot before it rotates out. You're going to have a blast with it personally. The last card on the list, and a card that I personally think that needs to see some play in a blue-black artifact deck, is Tezzeret's Touch. 1 blue and a black for an enchantment aura. Enchant Artifact. Enchanted Artifact is a creature with base power and toughness 5/5 in addition to its other type. When Enchanted Artifact is put into a graveyard, return that card to its owner's hand. Honestly, guys, we are currently in a standard meta where there's a ton of artifacts that have really significant ETB triggers. Prophetic Prism, the little pup that makes you draw a card and gain life. Even cards from this set that actually have some decent ETB effects. And I feel like this is a card hard to remit to not give a shot. I mean, it's one of the better ways to actually make your Heart of Kirin into a 5/5 consistent creature, and then once people just try to Fatal Push it, then it's just going to become a card in your hand again. That's not bad. Honestly, and also with Tezzeret, the new Tezzeret Planeswalkers making a bunch of Thopters, making those Thopters into 5/5s, sure, you're not going to get the synergy that the Thopter can't bounce into your hands, it's technically tokens fizzle, but making the fact that these can synergize really well with the Tezzeret Planeswalker is kind of scary. Plus, there's just some... it can just go on and on, guys. I think this is an aura... I mean, even if you go into Esper auras with Saram, Danitha, and just everything else being artifacts and this aura or control auras, that might actually be a deck archetype worth a shot. That might be something I might do for Janky Friday or something. Anyway, honestly, try this card out. I think it's one of those cards that people will presume it's unassuming at first and think it might be a little too slow, but the power level on this card, especially in the current meta, will probably be a little absurd. Plus, you get an excuse to do the old San, aka, you got the touch, you got the... you know the rest. And that's my list for 10 cards that I think people need to give a shot back in Standard before they rotate out with the upcoming Ravnica block. Now, honestly, I could put a couple more cards on this list, but honestly, I want you guys watching to actually just go back to those old sets and look at some of the cards. There's just some sometimes while we always like to focus going on to the future and such and be like, oh, what's this new card? What can I do with it? Oh, what broken deck can I make? I think it's best to always, as a person who likes to jank brew a lot, and also as a player itself, to always, as the old cliche saying goes, respect your elders. Sometimes, when you can look a little bit back at the past and look at some cards that are getting some dust at some random store owner's collection binder or in deck boxes and such, you might find a little gem of a card that really deserves to see some extra shine before it can only be played in eternal formats. So honestly, guys, look at your past. Look at the Amonkhet and Kaladesh block. I know many people are going to be excited for them rotating out because of some very annoying cards to go against in the current meta. But honestly, these sets in themselves have some very fun and interesting cards that I think it's worth a second glance. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a lovely day.